Your mother passed away? So what? Serve my guests. My husband left. I served the food while tears ran down my face. My husband's boss took my hand and asked, "Why are you crying?" I told him. He walked over to my husband and said, "Everyone knew your wife except you. She is my sister." I was holding a tray of steaming plates when my vision blurred again. The living room was filled with cheerful voices, clinking glasses, and the polished laughter my husband always used when he wanted to impress someone, but all I could feel was the ache in my chest, pulsing heavier with every breath. My mother had died 3 hours earlier. I had not even had a moment to sit with the reality of it. Colton leaned close to me, his voice a low warning that only I could hear. "Keep smiling. Serve them. Do not ruin this night for me." The expose was familiar. The timing was savage. I swallowed hard and nodded, not because I agreed, but because I had no strength left to argue. I stepped toward the guests again. Mr. Calloway, Colton's boss, lifted his eyes and paused. He noticed my trembling hands. He noticed the small black dress I had thrown on because it was the only way I knew how to honor my mother tonight. He noticed the tears I kept wiping away. "Why are you crying, Aubrey? And why are you dressed like that?" I whispered. "My mother passed away this afternoon." The room went completely silent. Even the air felt different, heavier. Then Mr. Ratcliffe Calloway saw the locket resting against my collarbone, and his expression changed entirely. Shock, then recognition, then something like fury. He turned slowly to my husband and said in a voice that carried through the entire room, "You just made the biggest mistake of your life. My name is Aubrey Langford, and before that night, I had always considered myself an ordinary woman. I worked quietly as a seamstress in a small shop on the corner of Cedarbrook Road, stitching hems, repairing pockets, and creating dresses for people who still believed clothing could hold memories. I like the rhythm of thread sliding through fabric. I like the feeling of turning something torn into something whole again. I grew up with my mother, Miriam, in a small apartment above a bakery. Life was simple, sometimes difficult, but filled with warmth. She was the kind of woman who could make a room feel safer just by being in it. She taught me how to sew, how to save money, how to speak gently, even when the world was loud. On cold winter nights, she and I would sit by the window mending coats for the neighborhood kids. She always said that kindness was a currency that never ran out. After she retired, her health began to fade, but she never stopped asking about my life. Every time I visited her, she would touch my cheek and say she was proud of the woman I had become. I never realized how much those moments meant until they were gone. My marriage to Colton had once seemed like a bright future. He used to bring me wildflowers, leave notes in my lunch bag, promised me a life full of support and partnership. But slowly, almost quietly, that man disappeared. In his place was someone who criticized my work, monitored my spending, and reminded me often that he earned more and therefore mattered more. Still, I stayed. I told myself all marriages had seasons. I convinced myself that patience was a virtue. I believed if I kept giving, eventually he would give back. I was wrong. Looking back, the unraveling of my marriage did not happen in one dramatic moment. It happened in small, almost invisible shifts, the kind you only recognize once they have stacked on top of each other until you can no longer carry them. Colton began changing a few months after our wedding. At first it was little comments about my job. He would ask why I chose to sew when I could find something more respectable, something that brought in real money. I tried to laugh it off, but each remark chipped away at the confidence my mother had spent years building in me. Then came the rules. He wanted access to my phone because he said couples should not keep secrets. He started managing our bank accounts because he claimed budgeting stressed me out. When I bought fabric for personal projects, he questioned every receipt. When I stayed late at the shop, he accused me of wasting time. I told myself he was just under pressure, that everyone goes through difficult phases, that marriage required compromise. But slowly the compromise became one-sided, and the apartment that once felt like home began to feel like a place where I had to walk gently to avoid waking something dangerous inside him. Sometimes when I lay awake at night, I imagined telling my mother everything. She would have told me to leave. She would have asked me why I was shrinking myself to fit inside a version of life that did not belong to me. But I never told her. I kept hoping Colton would return to the man I married, the one who held my hands and promised he would never let me face life alone. That man was long gone. The day my mother passed away began like any other. I was at the shop hemming a bridesmaid dress when my phone started ringing non-stop in my apron pocket. I almost ignored it. Colton hated when I answered personal calls at work, and the last thing I wanted was another lecture waiting for me at home. But something in my chest tightened, a quiet instinct telling me to pick up. It was the hospital. The nurse spoke gently, choosing her words with care, but nothing could soften the weight of what she said. My mother had gone into cardiac arrest earlier that morning. They tried to revive her. They tried everything, but she was gone. For a long moment I could not speak. My hand froze around the phone. The world felt blurry and silent, as if someone had turned down the volume of life itself. I remember nodding even though the nurse could not see me. I remember thanking her because it was the only polite thing I could think to do. I sat on the dressing stool for nearly an hour, staring at the fabric in my lap. The bridesmaid dress slipped to the floor. Tears would not come. Shock held them back like a dam. When I finally walked home, the air felt colder than it should have. The city kept moving around me as if nothing had happened, as if my world had not just cracked in half. I told myself I would talk to Colton. I desperately needed comfort, support, someone to say, I am here. But when he opened the door, everything inside me sank. His first words were not, what happened, or, are you all right? They were, why is dinner not ready? In that moment, standing in the doorway with swollen eyes and trembling hands, I realized Colton had not even noticed I was late. His disappointment was not about my sadness, it was about the empty dining table behind me. I tried to speak, but the words tangled in my throat. My mother died today. I finally managed to whisper. He blinked once, expression unchanged. Then he sighed annoyed, as if I had just told him the store was out of his favorite coffee. Aubrey, you know how important tonight is. Richard Calloway is coming. This dinner could change my entire career. Can you please hold it together for a few hours? Hold it together as if grief were something I could fold neatly and tuck away in a drawer. As if losing the only family I had was a small inconvenience in his schedule. He handed me a list of dishes he wanted on the table by 7. His voice sharpened when he saw I was not moving. Do not start crying. Not now. If you ruin this night, you will ruin everything for both of us. I moved because I had no strength left to fight. I chopped vegetables while my vision blurred. I burned my hand on a pan because I could not focus. At one point, I leaned against the counter, trying to breathe through the ache in my chest. Colton walked by, glanced at me and said, we cannot afford drama tonight. When the guests arrived, I put on the only black dress I owned, a quiet tribute to my mother. I hoped no one would notice the redness around my eyes. But Mr. Calloway did. He watched me closely as I poured wine as I silently wiped tears that refused to stay back as Colton kicked my leg under the table whenever I paused too long. The room buzzed with polite conversation. Yet all I could hear was the echo of my mother's voice, telling me I deserved better than this. For the first time, I wondered if she had been right. As I leaned forward to refill Mr. Jaffer Calloway's glass, my hands were shaking so badly that the wine swayed near the rim. I tried to steady myself, but the chain around my neck slipped loose. The small silver locket that had belonged to my mother slipped out from beneath my collar and landed gently against my dress. Mr. Calloway's eyes locked on it instantly. May I ask where you got that? He said quietly, his voice cutting through the noise of the room. I hesitated. My mother gave it to me when I turned 13. She said it had been in our family for generations, but she never told me more than that. His expression shifted. First disbelief, then recognition so sharp it felt like a blade. He asked for my mother's name. When I answered Miriam Langford, he inhaled sharply as if someone had knocked the breath out of him. That is not a common name, he murmured. His gaze grew heavier. Did your mother ever live in Easton County? The question shocked me. Yes, she grew up there. She never wanted to talk about her past. He closed his eyes for a moment, steadying himself. Then he looked at me with an emotion I could not name. Aubrey, that locket belonged to my family. My sister disappeared 30 years ago. She ran away under circumstances we never understood. Her name was Miriam. My heart stopped. Before I could react, Colton cut in, trying to steer the conversation away, but Mr. Calloway stood. His voice was no longer gentle. You forced this woman to serve us on the day her mother died, and you did not even know who she was. He turned to my husband with a stare so cold that it silenced the entire room. You have made the gravest mistake of your life. Colton tried to laugh it off, a nervous, brittle sound that fooled no one. He put a hand on Mr. Dapa Calloway's shoulder as if they were old friends caught in a harmless misunderstanding. Sir, Aubrey is emotional. She exaggerates things when she is upset. You know how women can be. The room froze. Mr. Calloway stepped away from him as if the touch itself was offensive. His voice, once calm and fatherly, now carried the weight of someone used to commanding entire boardrooms. I will not tolerate disrespect toward my family. Not tonight, not ever. Colton blinked, confused. Your family? What do you mean? I mean exactly what I said. Miriam was my sister, which makes Aubrey my gore. The color drained from my husband's face so completely that for the first time in years he looked small, vulnerable, suddenly aware that the world he had carefully constructed was slipping out from under him. Sir, please, Colton stammered. I can explain. I love my wife. Today was just bad timing. You know how important this job is to me. Richard straightened his jacket. That job is no longer yours. The words landed with the force of a hammer. Colton opened his mouth, but Richard raised a hand, ending the conversation. And one more thing, this is a company-owned property, part of the Calloway family trust. And as of this moment, the only recognized heir is Aubrey. my breath caught. Colton looked around the room, desperate for someone to take his side. No one moved. I finally met his eyes and said with a steadiness I did not know I possessed. Colton, pack your things. You are leaving tonight. 2 days later, the church was filled with soft organ music and the scent of lilies, my mother's favorite flower. I stood near the front, holding the folded program with her picture on it, trying to steady my breathing. Grief is a strange companion. It sits heavy on your chest, but somehow leaves you feeling hollow at the same time. People from the neighborhood came to pay their respects. Old customers from the shop, former co-workers of my mother, even a few strangers who said she had once helped them in small but meaningful ways. Their stories brought warmth to a day that felt unbearably cold. Then the door slammed open. Colton strode in with a man I recognized immediately as an attorney. Their shoes echoed sharply against the marble floor, slicing through the hushed stillness. Whispers rippled across the room. Even the pastor fell silent. Aubrey, we need to speak, Colton announced, his tone loud enough for everyone to hear. Desperio cannot proceed. I felt my knees weaken. What are you talking about? The attorney stepped forward. According to this signed authorization from 3 years ago, your husband has temporary decision-making rights regarding your mother's estate and medical matters. Until this is resolved, she cannot be interred. Gasps filled the chapel. Someone muttered, "Is he serious?" Richard, seated in the front row, rose slowly. His expression was controlled, but his eyes burned with anger. "You do not belong here," he said to Colton. "Leave now before you make the stay more painful than it already is." Colton puffed his chest. "I am acting within my legal rights." "No, you are acting out of greed," Richard replied, stepping closer. "And if you try to interrupt this funeral again, the police will escort you out." 2 ushers moved toward Colton. The attorney tugged his sleeve, whispering urgently. Finally, with a glare that promised further trouble, Colton turned and walked out. The doors closed behind him, but the damage lingered like a bruise. I lowered my head and whispered, "I am so sorry, Mom. I promise I will protect what is yours." The service continued, but nothing felt peaceful anymore. After the funeral, I returned to my mother's apartment to sort through her belongings. The rooms were quiet in a way that made my heartbeat sound too loud. I moved slowly, touching her favorite mug, her worn cardigan, the small sewing box she had carried since her teens. Every item felt like a final conversation I would never get to finish. Richard arrived later that afternoon. He stood in the doorway for a long moment before saying, "I want to help you settle everything, not just because you are my niece, but because your mother deserved better than what happened." We sat at the kitchen table while he reviewed the documents the attorney had tried to use against me. He frowned as he turned the pages. "These papers are outdated. They were never meant for estate control." Colton twisted their purpose. I felt the familiar sting of betrayal, but Richard tapped the final page and added, "This is not the worst part." He pulled out a folded map, the official seal of the state printed across the top. "Aubrey, did you know your mother still owned a piece of land in Easton County?" I nodded faintly. "She told me it was worthless, just a patch of dirt she never used." Richard slid the map toward me. "That patch of dirt sits directly in the path of a new federal highway expansion. The state will need that land. The estimated compensation is around $1.3 million. My breath caught. The number barely felt real. Richard continued, "Colton discovered this months ago. He requested copies of the land records through your joint address. He has been planning to claim the payout behind your back." A slow realization settled into my bones. The sudden interest in my mother's medical decisions. The rush to control her estate. The desperation at the funeral. He was not mourning, he was hunting. I closed my eyes, grief folding silently into anger. Colton had taken so much from me, but this time, he would not take the last thing my mother left behind. For the first time since she died, I felt a spark of resolve. When I returned to the apartment Colton and I had once shared, the door was slightly open. A chill moved down my spine. Inside, the place looked as though a storm had torn through it. Drawers were overturned, cushions ripped open. My sewing machine knocked to the floor. The life I had built piece by piece lay scattered in ruins. At first I thought it was simple rage. Colton had always struggled to control his temper. But as I stepped carefully through the mess, something else caught my eye. A stack of envelopes lay tossed near the kitchen island. All of them were addressed to me. I picked up the first one and felt my stomach twist. It was a debt notice. Then another and another. By the time I reached the bottom of the pile, my hands were shaking. More than $150,000 in loans, all in my name. My mind raced. I had never applied for any of this, never signed anything. But tucked between the letters was a familiar form with my signature crudely copied at the bottom. He had reused a medical release form I signed years ago, scanned it, and pasted the signature onto new documents. The banks had accepted it without question because the accounts were joint. In the middle of the chaos, I found a bank statement showing where the money had gone. Transfers to a salon called Carter & Company, specifically to its owner, Belle Carter, his mistress. The realization hit with a force that knocked the air from my lungs. Colton had not only planned to take my mother's land, he had already emptied my future to fund his new life with someone else. I sank onto the floor, surrounded by shredded memories and forged promises. I had lost my mother, my home, and now the financial stability she had always begged me to protect. But sitting there clutching those debt letters, something inside me hardened. I would not let him break what remained of me. The next morning I drove to Carter & Company, the salon where most of the transfers had gone. The building was sleek and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows and gold lettering across the entrance. It looked nothing like the small, cozy places I was used to. This was luxury funded with my stolen future. Inside, the air smelled of hairspray and expensive perfume. A woman with flawless curls and sharp eyeliner walked toward me, her heels clicking confidently across the marble floor. "You must be Aubrey," she said, smiling in a way that did not reach her eyes. "Colton mentioned you might show up eventually." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "He talked about me." She shrugged only when he was frustrated. "You were holding him back. You know, he deserved better." "Better?" That word stung more than it should have. I asked her directly, "Did you know he used my name to fund this place? Did you know he put me in debt so you could have your dream salon?" She did not flinch. Men do what they need to do. "And for the record, I am pregnant. He wants to build a future with me." The room tilted for a second. Pregnant. The word echoed in my mind like a warning. But then I remembered something Donna, my mother-in-law, had once let slip during an argument. A medical condition from Colton's early 20s. Something he had hidden out of embarrassment. "He cannot have children." My gaze locked onto Belle. "Has he even told you the truth about himself?" Her smirk faltered. I stepped closer. "Whatever fantasy he has sold you, it is built on my money, my signature and my life, and it is already falling apart." For the first time, she looked uncertain, and it gave me a small, steadying breath. I walked out, leaving the scent of her expensive perfume behind me like a fading lie. I drove straight to Donna's house, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. She opened the door with a startled look, as if she had not expected to see me standing there with swollen eyes and an expression that no longer carried fear. "Aubrey, this is not a good time." "It will only take a minute," I said. My voice sounded calm, almost too calm. I stepped inside before she had the chance to refuse. She began fidgeting with the edge of her sweater, avoiding my eyes. "If this is about Colton, I do not know what he has told you, but he is under a lot of pressure." I reached into my bag and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a check I had written for $20,000. I placed it on the table between us. "I need answers." "That is for you. All you have to do is tell me the truth." Her eyes widened at the sight of the check. Her fingers twitched toward it, but then she hesitated. Guilt and greed waged a silent war across her face. I pressed gently. "You know what he did. You helped him. You knew about the documents, the loans, the land. You knew he was after my mother's estate long before she passed." The silence stretched. Finally, her shoulder sagged. She reached for the check as though it weighed 1,000 lb. "Fine," she whispered. "I will tell you everything." I clicked my pen, pretending to sign the check, and tapped my phone screen. The recorder was already running. Donna confessed. The forged papers, the land search, the plan to control my mother's medical care, even the pharmacy contact, who helped switch her medication. She spilled every secret she had guarded. When she finished, I picked up the check, tore it cleanly in half, and placed the pieces in her stunned hands. "I do not pay for the truth, Donna. I just needed you to say it out loud." That night, I stayed at my mother's apartment. It was the only place that still felt familiar, even if the silence pressed against me like a weight. I made tea, sat by the window, and replayed Donna's confession over and over in my mind. The truth had finally surfaced, but I knew Colton would not let it end there. Men like him never accept losing control. Around midnight, I posted a short message on social media, thanking friends for their condolences and letting them know I was safe. It was not something I normally did, but after everything that had happened, I needed people to know where I was. The post got a few quiet reactions, and then I turned off my phone and tried to sleep. I woke to the smell of smoke. At first, I thought it was part of a dream, but the heat creeping under the bedroom door told me otherwise. I jumped out of bed, my heart pounding. When I opened the door, thick smoke rolled in like a suffocating wave. Flames licked up the hallway walls, crackling angrily. And through the chaos, I heard a voice I knew too well. "Aubrey, come out, Colton." I stumbled backward, coughing, my eyes burning as I tried to find a way out. The front door was already engulfed in flames. The windows in the living room glowed orange from the heat. He had trapped me. Through the shattered opening of the hallway, I saw him standing outside holding an empty gas can. His smile was twisted, almost unrecognizable. "You ruined everything," he shouted. "So now I am taking it all back." The fire roared behind me, pushing me toward the bedroom window. Desperation took over. I grabbed a blanket, wrapped it around my hands, and smashed the glass. Cold night air rushed in sharp against my smoke-filled lungs. People were screaming below. Someone yelled that the fire department was on the way. My earlier post had alerted friends nearby that something was wrong. They had come to check on me and arrived just in time. With no other choice, I climbed onto the narrow ledge and lowered myself toward the awning below. The fall was short but jarring, knocking the breath out of me. Strong arms pulled me away from the burning building. Behind us, the sirens grew louder. Colton tried to run, but neighbors tackled him before he could escape. His protests were wild, desperate, echoing through the street like the last cries of a man who had finally lost the power he worshipped. As the firefighters battled the flames, I watched the home of my childhood burn. But I was alive. And for the first time, I felt something stronger than fear. I felt the beginning of freedom. The weeks that followed felt like living inside a storm that refused to pass. After the fire, detectives questioned me for hours. They photographed the burns on my hands, the bruises on my arms from climbing out the window, and the shattered remains of my mother's belongings. Every detail became part of a case that grew larger and more serious by the day. Colton was charged with arson, attempted murder, identity fraud, and financial abuse. His attorney argued that he had suffered a mental breakdown, that stress and fear had clouded his judgment, but the evidence told a different story, one he could not twist or outrust. During the trial, the courtroom stayed packed. Reporters, neighbors, even strangers who had followed the news coverage filled the benches. The prosecutor laid out the timeline, the forged loans, the attempt to control my mother's medical decisions, the discovery of the $1 million land, and finally the fire. When I took the stand, my hands trembled, but my voice did not. I described the night of the dinner, the funeral, the debt letters, Belle's confession, and the moment I woke to smoke filling the apartment. Each memory was a weight I had carried alone until then. Speaking them aloud felt like finally setting them down. Then the prosecutor played the recording. Donna's voice echoed through the courtroom, clear and unmistakable. Her confession detailed the plan she and Colton had devised, the pharmacy contact who had switched my mother's medication, and the strategy to seize control of the estate. A ripple of shock spread across the room. Even Colton closed his eyes as if hearing the truth spoken out loud stripped him of whatever excuses he had clung to. When the verdict came, the silence was absolute. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 25 years in state prison without the possibility of early release. He did not look at me as they led him away. For the first time in a very long time, I exhaled without fear. The day after the verdict, the city felt different, softer, somehow, quieter, as if the noise that had chased me for months had finally gone silent. I returned to my mother's old apartment one last time before the renovations began. The walls were stripped down, the window frames removed, the floor covered with fresh lumber. Nothing looked the way it had during the fire, and yet, I could still feel the echo of the moment the flames had chased me across the room. But for the first time, the memory didn't crush me. Instead, I felt something unexpected. Possibility. The construction crew had left a blueprint on the counter labeled Riley AITA. Clean lines, open rooms, warm light. My mother would have loved it. She used to joke that beauty was born from ashes because ashes make the richest soil. Now I understood what she meant. 2 months later, the atelier opened its doors. Women lined the hallway, some holding old dresses that needed a second life, others coming simply because they had followed my story online and wanted to support a survivor who refused to be silenced. I wore the dress I made the night of the fire, the one stitched together from torn curtains and scraps. Reporters photographed it as if it were couture, but to me it was something far more valuable. It was proof that the hands my mother taught to sew could remake more than fabric. They could remake a life. As the ribbon was cut, I saw movement near the entrance. Donna, not the savage, sharp-tongued woman I once knew. She stood smaller now, wrapped in a coat 2 sizes too big, clutching a bus ticket like it was a lifeline. She didn't approach. She didn't speak. She only nodded once, a gesture of apology, or surrender I couldn't tell. And then she walked away. I didn't call after her. Some chapters aren't meant to be reopened. I stepped inside, letting the door shut gently behind me. Sunlight flooded the room, bouncing off the mirrors, warming the air. For the first time since all of this began, the future didn't scare me. It felt wide open. It felt mine. People often ask me now if I regret any of it, if I ever wish I had walked away sooner or stayed quiet or let the truth stay buried to avoid the chaos that followed, and I always give them the same answer. No. Because surviving something isn't the same as living through it. Surviving is what I did for years. Shrinking myself, silencing my instincts, apologizing for things that were never my fault. Living began the moment I decided my mother's death would not be another secret swallowed by fear. Justice didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the nights I cried until dawn, or the debt notices piled at my door, or the cold silence in the apartment after the fire. But justice gave me something else. Space. Space to breathe. Space to rebuild. Space to remember who I was before someone tried to rewrite my life as their property. My atelier is small, but when I unlock the door each morning and smell the faint scent of fabric and cedar, it feels like stepping into a promise. Each dress I designed carries a stitch of my mother's courage, a bit of her stubbornness, and the softness she taught me to never mistake for weakness. If you're listening to this and you're standing at the edge of your own breaking point, hear me clearly. You are allowed to reclaim your life. You are allowed to walk away from the people who break you. You are allowed to rise even if you rise alone. Thank you for staying with me through this journey.